Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we embark on our second of a four-day program on the crisis of democracy and governance in the United States. Those of you who watched the State of the Union last night, as President Biden gave his second State of the Union message, you would have heard the heckling and the Republican responses after the State of the Union, and been reminded once again about how broken politics are in the United States. I think it's worth just bearing in mind, in my view anyway, there are two real causes for this. One's an immediate cause triggered by Donald Trump when he refused to acknowledge the integrity of the 2020 elections. And that set in motion in the Republican Party and around the United States an attempt to discredit the democratic process and essentially to engage in a coup by various forms of subterfuge and manipulation. However, there's a deeper reason that I think we have the crisis that we have in America. And that is that this country has been in perpetual war since 1941, the only country in the world about which that can be said. And if you look at history, there's no examples anywhere of where perpetual war has not extinguished any kind of democratic impulse. There's an old saying that the first casualty of war is the truth. The second casualty of war is democracy. And essentially the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower warned us about in 1960 has effectively taken over the instrument of governance. And one of the things you will have noted about President Biden's speech last night is his militancy against the Russians as the United States takes on the other superpower in the world over Ukraine, and how the United States is mobilizing for conflict and war with China over the incident of the balloon. So as the world watches the United States, the world is watching in some way an accident in slow motion, highly militarized, internally dysfunctional. And therefore the efforts on the part of American citizens to somehow, in the face of this adversity, to keep the flame of democracy alive is actually an extraordinary act of heroism. Whether it will succeed or not ultimately is a matter of history. But right now, we can say, I think with some confidence, that there were enough of us in the front lines in this last election in 2022 to salvage at least enough of the democratic process to begin to prepare for 2024. And so today we're going to look at one of those organizations that has been valiantly seeking to empower the vote, to ensure the integrity of the electoral process, and support the proposition that in the end, the viability of the United States depends fundamentally on maintaining a government for the people, by the people, of the people. As we always do before we launch into our program, let us just pause and breathe together in a world of escalating stress just simply breathing together is a very important thing for us to do. So in a moment, for those of you who are new, you'll hear the sound of a bell. When you hear that bell, just breathe in very slowly for about 5.5 seconds. Then you'll hear another bell and just breathe out for about 5.5 seconds. We'll take 10 breaths together, and you'll note that you'll just feel more coherent and more emotionally calm. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. It's always good to breathe together. At Humanity Rising, we take on very deep issues, sometimes controversial issues, as we try to, day by day and week by week and year by year now, to track world events as they unfold and bring people together in dialogue so that we can inspire ourselves in the spirit of truth pursued rather than truth possessed, but remind people that the world is burning and we need to come together in such a way that humanity can rise to take those kinds of collective actions that are required urgently to maintain the viability of human civilization as we know it. And democracy and the preservation of democracy is one of those code red issues that we're very attentive to. I want to now welcome my good friends, George Cappannelli, the founder and CEO of Age Nation, and John Steiner, who along with his wife, Margo King, have been networkers par excellence for many, many years. And both George and John and Margo are passionate about preserving democracy in the United States. So George, John, I turn the program over to you with great thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Before John has some things to say and introduces another really terrific group of individuals that Jim referred to in his opening, individuals who are on the front line and make just a remarkable difference in whether democracy survives or doesn't. And that, of course, is the purpose of this program, to introduce you to individuals who are making a difference, to give you a greater understanding of how that's accomplished and the role that you can play in supporting them and in becoming more informed and proactive citizens. I differ a little bit with some of the things that Jim said. Most importantly, I think there's no doubt that our democracy today is dysfunctional. But as was proven in the 2018, 2020, and 2022 elections, there's still some life and some fire in the system. And the goal that Jim talked about, which is to save democracy, because frankly, the alternative is unacceptable, is a goal that clearly John and I and all of us involved in this series not only support, but are doing what we can to contribute to. Just a few words about the State of the Union last night. Those of you in other countries who may not have watched it, the dysfunction in our government is obvious not only by the outbursts from some members of the Republican Party, but by their lack of response on issues that anyone in their right mind would be supporting. I must admit, I felt very badly for Kevin McCarthy, having worked so hard, sacrificed so much of his soul to get finally on that podium, to have to sit there. And I couldn't tell, frankly, whether he was playing pocket pool or whether he was applauding. And he certainly looked like he had some gas in his system or something. But when I watched that, I was struck by and reminded of a quote from Abraham Lincoln, who said, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." And I think that's one of the things that we're up against. I think another thing that we're up against is that we have forgotten some basic truths. When I review our documents, our founding documents, and I think about the promise of democracy, I realize that there are three factors that are absolutely necessary for saving democracy. The first is that the level and quality of our individual and collective participation as informed citizens needs to be there. The second is our willingness and our commitment as a nation to remain aligned with the vision and practice of the core principles found in our documents, our founding documents, and then to maintain a covenant of trust between those we elect and those of us who elect them. And the third is the level of integrity, of competency and character of those who we do elect to represent us, and their willingness and commitment to act in alignment with their oaths of office. So as we listen today and the rest of the week and in future weeks, let's remember that those three ingredients are really incredibly essential. And now, John, please.
Thank you, George, as always. And Jim, thank you particularly for the variable of the military-industrial complex, which is kind of a elephant in our room of democracy, along with others. And before we bring on our panelists today, George, I want to add one thing to what can citizens do, which I know has been your theme throughout this, what you've called the power of one. Many of you know the extraordinary work of Michael Moore. And he, over Christmas, actually did 12 Days of Christmas, where he did a series of short 12 to 18-minute podcasts of what he called Blue Dots in a Red Sea. And he was really speaking to individuals in red states and red counties and red cities about what they could do as individuals to advance democracy. And if you Google Michael Moore, Blue Dots in a Red Sea, episode 12, you'll get the series of all 12 episodes that he did. The 12th one was a summary, but I really commend it to everyone, including our panelists and everybody listening today, because it's the best example and exposition from a guy who's been a long-term organizer and passionate democracy defender, both with a small d, but also for a right direction for the Democratic Party that I've ever heard. And I think people who want to take some or all of that time to listen to Michael Moore, I wish we could get him on the show sometime, will be happy we've done so. So for that, let me bring on Billy Wimsatt and Karina Uribe and Javier Murillo Alicia. And I just, Billy and I and Margo go way, way, way back. Billy, I don't know if that's going to be.
Hey, everyone, it's Michael Moore.
I thought you were going to put on a white helmet so we could help out the screen.
Sorry.
No. We have to have humor and comedy in the middle of this most serious Code Red for democracy and Code Red for planet that we're up against. So I am just utterly thrilled, Billy, to have you and two folks who I have not known yet. And now what I get to do is find out where I put everybody's bios so I can actually do this. Billy, at some level,
we'll introduce ourselves, blah, 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 bios.
That's all right. It's worthy for folks who don't know you. I'm going to take a few minutes because you kind of speak for yourself, and I'll just say, hey, you've done great work over the years. You started Movement Voter Project. You've got 25 years of experience doing almost anything you can think of to preserve and protect democracy. And you have created a system where many, many donors have been able to help support many, many grassroots groups around the country. And you founded a whole bunch of other organizations. You've written books and articles. You've been on TV. You really have become what I like to call a friend of mine who's a hero. I love it when my friends are heroes. And you're certainly one of them. And it's just been a pleasure for us to know you all these years and watch you go from there to here and who knows where else. So thank you. Welcome. And we'll hear more about, obviously. And, if you want to tell us more about yourself and toot your own horn some more, feel free to do so.
Well, you want us to introduce ourselves, right?
No, I'm going to introduce Karina and Javier first, and then we'll go from there. So we really have two amazing people that you've brought on today, neither of whom I had known. So Karina I'm just so moved by who you are and what you've done. Karina is an undocumented DACA student whose journey to finish college led her to the world of community activism and organizing. And it was in that tight community of social justice organizing in Arizona that she found her calling as a community organizer, and where she found her new chosen family, and ultimately, as we'll hear, found her way to the Movement Voter Project. She served as a campaign manager for the in-state for DACA and led Dreamers Drive efforts in Arizona, two incredibly important advocacy campaigns to move the rights of immigrant youth forward. And you have to know how courageous it is for somebody to do this kind of work. Her passion for education equity led her to co-found Undocumented Students for Education Equity and to mentor undocumented college students on the power of organizing. And I had not known this, had known any of this. In 2016, she was part of the historic effort to get the sheriff, the really fascist sheriff, removed from
Arpaio.
What was his first name? Anyway, she helped get him removed from office, which was a really big deal in the evolution of democracy in Arizona. And I love this quote. She writes, doing work, and this I think applies to so many of us and so many of us who want to find this, doing work with a sense of purpose is important to me. And I am fortunate to have the privilege to pursue this type of work that fills my soul every day. Karina, welcome. Javier Murillo Alicia actually started out as an historian and anthropologist, teaching courses in Latin American history, comparative colonial cultures, and globalization at Carleton and Macalester College, both of which are near Minnesota. He's a Fulbright scholar with a bachelor's degree in history from Yale and lives on the west side of St. Paul with his partner of 13 years. Aside from that, for 14 years, he was the long-term president of the Service Employees Minnesota International Union Local 26. I'm not sure how long you were president of that. You can let us know, but you were with that union for a good piece. You helped unite 5,000 property service workers in the Twin City area. And as president, he led organizing, legislative, and political activities of the local union representing Minnesota's union janitors and private security guards, and really has gone on to do that kind of work and support other such efforts around the country, particularly in Texas, and to take very important other local issues of affordable health care and dramatic wage increases successfully to his constituency and to lots of others. He was active in electoral politics, first with the Dean Campaign for America, a city council member in St. Paul, and then Keith Ellison, who ran for chair of the Democratic Party and is now the wonderful Attorney General in Minnesota. So 14 years was a long enough time, it turns out. And most recently, he was part of the Center for Innovation and Worker Organization at the Rutgers University School of Management and Labor Relations as a Minnesota-based program fellow. So again, blessings to you both. Welcome to the show. And here we go. And Rachel Gordon, whose picture is on with us, is the deputy assistant to Billy, and will be helping to manage the chat and has herded the Movement Voter Project cats today to this event. Probably without Rachel, you guys wouldn't be. So Billy, let's.
Thank you, John. Thank you, George and Jim.
Our pleasure,
So Billy, let's start with you. Give our audience a sense of the range of work and the scope of work you all do. What you felt were successes in 22, where we came up a little short, and what our plans are for 2024 to continue moving us away from the real challenge in this country is between democracy and extremism. Because on the Democratic side of the ledger, we have a lot of Republicans, a lot of independents, a lot of non-voters, a lot of undocumenteds, a lot of people who care about our country. So Billy, let's turn it over to you to start.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. Welcome. Humanity rising. Put your hands up. Let's rise, people. Oh my God. This is so wonderful. Thank you everyone for taking this time with us. And it's so funny. It's so wonderful to be here with Javier and Corina. And if you think about like states that have made a huge transformation over the last 10 years, Arizona, bright red state, suddenly Arizona, completely different place. Minnesota, kind of like, purple state that's really stuck in gridlock for 10 years. Suddenly, trifecta. Democrats have a trifecta in Minnesota, and they're passing all kinds of legislation. I won't spoil Javier's punchlines, but you're looking at two people who were central protagonists in the story of their state's transformation in Arizona, in Minnesota, and they're both also just like visionaries beyond their states. Like Corina, you might have seen, had an op-ed in the New York Times not too long ago, and Javier is just like, I'm excited to hear, both your stories from your states and also like your vision and kind of strategic, bigger picture thoughts as well. I'll go back a little bit because, and we have people from Minnesota and Arizona in the house already. So this is going to be good. So I'll just go back. I think it's good to just tell little stories of where each of us, each of our background. So, and when you were having us kind of like breathe, I went to a pretty deep place in thinking about like why I do this work and what caused me to do this work. I grew up in Chicago. I grew up kind of in two worlds, neighborhood called High Park, where the Obamas are from. And in fourth grade, our teacher told us that there were nuclear weapons pointed at Chicago. And if a nuclear weapon hit Chicago, this is, there was this movie, The Day After, this TV show, The Day After, that was really controversial when I was in fourth grade. Should kids watch it? About the day after a nuclear war. And I was like, wait a minute, like, yeah, we would all be dead. Like, wait, what are the grownups doing? Like, how are we in this situation? And so I organized, a march. I didn't even know what a march was, but I was like, we have to march, with my fourth grade class. And I got involved in the nuke freeze movement back then. And basically since then, it's been the same question, like, what are the grownups doing? And how do we do this differently? Because this is not good. And so that led me to learning about movements, to studying the movements of the 60s and asking, like, why don't our generation have movements? All through the 90s, I was the national talent scout for Rock the Vote, trying to find the best young activists around the country. So I spent a year traveling the country, who are the young activists who are going to change things like they did in the 60s, And so I've been obsessed with this. How do we have a movement that's better than the movements that actually transforms this country for real? And I had a really, an awareness of the climate crisis, of the military industrial complex, as George was talking about, and also a very visceral experience of racial injustice, with living in two worlds. I went to the public school and the private school, and but at a certain point, a lot of my friends got on drugs, and the white kids got sent to therapy and Europe, and and a lot of my my friends who grew up, who are people of color and grew up in tougher life situations that didn't have as much opportunities to be, just had really really hard experiences, and that lit a burning anger and pain in me. Like, we have to change this. We have to change the system that is like evil in how it treats many people in our society. That's deeply, it's humanity falling, not humanity rising. So that led me on a series of things, asking the question, how do we have a movement that actually transforms this country to actually get the change we need? And that led me to two places I didn't expect it to go, which is philanthropy, because all these groups that are all the change makers, all the solutionaries out there, like, needed money, and the funding was totally messed up. They're like, well, we can't get money, or we do, and then there's a lot of strings attached, and the funders don't get it, and then on the other hand, it's like a lot of people who like have their hearts to want to change the world were like, oh, electoral politics is corrupt, and we don't want to have anything to do with it, and I was like, wait, what if we did those two things differently? What if we did politics in a way that was like actually spoke to people and was actually meaningful to people? So I got involved in something. I helped start something called the League of Pissed Off Voters, which was like, let's have fun with organizing a whole new generation to get involved in the changing the political system. Because in the 2000 election, and this completely changed my life. In the 2000 election, I was living in North Carolina. We were fighting. They were trying to double the size of my county jail. We were fighting that. At the same time, Florida, 2000, you all remember it. George Bush gets elected by 537 votes, and a corrupt Supreme Court and other things like that. But that's what I was like, wait, really 537 votes? Like, I could have gone to Florida. Like, my friends and I, we could have done something about that, And at the same time, in New Mexico, there were some groups that we were working with, some Native organizations that were trying to fight the biggest developer in Albuquerque, was trying to build a road over the petroglyphs, which are a Native sacred site, to his new development. And people started organizing, fighting, that, realized they had to do electoral politics to do it. And in that election, working on this local issue, they weren't even focused on the presidential election. They turned out about 3,000 unlikely Latino native voters. And guess what? Al Gore won the state of New Mexico by 366 votes. So I was like, wait, if there had been people like me or like the people in New Mexico, in Florida, we wouldn't have had George Bush, which means we wouldn't have had the Iraq War. We wouldn't have had the 3 Supreme Court appointments. We wouldn't have had the George Bush tax cuts and the things that led to, Citizens United and it went down a spiral. So I'm really, my father is an evolutionary biologist and philosopher of science and thinks about what's called generative entrenchment in evolution. So if something gets locked in, it's very hard to unentrench it, right? So that's why we have to be on the front end of things. We have to be proactive before we have spiraled into fascism, and fix things now so we don't get generatively entrenched into terrible things. So that all that led me to, how do we change politics to get many more people involved on their own terms and win these close elections? And how do we change philanthropy so that, and people are like, philanthropy, those are those people over there, that doesn't involve me. $500 billion a year goes into philanthropy, charity, and that's all of us. How many of you have donated something last year? Okay, you're a philanthropist. We're all philanthropists, and we all know, a lot of people are like, I'm not rich, I'm not, there are millions of millionaires in this country. Anyone who socializes with other people knows people who have resources. And I'm not asking everyone to become fundraisers. I never expected to become a fundraiser. That was never a career goal I had. I wanted to be a journalist, but it's a huge power that we have to organize people and money to change politics to affect these close elections. And so a quick story from Movement Voter Project. Yeah, Corina. Quick story from Movement Voter Project is, it was this obvious thing, right? How do most people get their political information to donate, right? You get emails, you get lots and lots of terrible emails. And if you are a donor to organizations, you get organizations bigger organizations like the ACLU or Planned Parenthood, will reach out to you, or candidates will reach out to you. And if you donate a lot, they'll call you. And meanwhile, so national organizations are great, we need them. Meanwhile, there are all these local organizations in places like Arizona, Minnesota, Georgia, that are created by the local people in their communities, which, are often on a shoestring, are often people fighting for their own lives in communities. They don't have a development department to send you mail appeals, and they don't have your email address. They're the ones really doing the work, where the money is going to make a much bigger difference because you're not paying for all this national infrastructure. So, but how do you know who to donate to if you want to support young people of color in Georgia, or young people of color in Arizona, or Michigan, or Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, who are going to get out the vote and save their own communities? Well, guess what? We did the research for you. And if you look at movement.vote, there's a map, and there are states, and we have researched, vetted in deep way these organizations. And in fact, Movement Voter Project now has a staff person in all of the key battleground states on the ground, each funding 40 organizations in the top battleground states. And they know these groups intimately, right? They know these groups intimately, not just like, oh, they sent in a grant proposal, look good. No, they know everyone on the staff. They know their board members. They know the staff members who left. They know the volunteers. They are in deep relationship with these groups, and they know how much money they need. And so we make recommendations of where the money should go based on this expertise at the grassroots level, so that if you're, living in California or New York or Massachusetts or, or even in Arizona, or Minnesota, wanting to support these organizations, we make it really easy for you to do that. You can either support it through Movement Voter Project, and then we divide it up, based on targeting and based on needs, or if you're moving a lot of money, if you're like, hey, I have an aunt who, has a donor advised fund who wants to move, money in a specific way to climate, with a, in the Midwest or whatever. We can also help you do that. You can give directly to groups. You can give to us to distribute to groups. We have donor advisors who can help, with bigger amounts, recommend where it should go based on donors' interests. So basically, we have solved this coordination problem to help get money from donors strategically directly to the people who are going to make the most difference in getting out the vote on the ground, which you'll hear more about in a minute. So, I mean, just to say, like, it's been incredibly successful. We just to tell a couple stories, and I'm really like obsessed with winning close elections. So I think our targeting is like the best targeting in the country. Because a lot of like political movers and shakers they'll be like, okay, we're going to target these 6 states or these 8 states or whatever. And then they forget about the rest of the country. So in the 2016 election, for example, New Hampshire was one of those states that nobody chose. It was not on anyone's 6 or 10 list, top list. And, we moved about $200,000 to 4 organizations in those states. And they talked to about 88,000 voters, many of whom were voters who no one else was talking to, right? Who they weren't on the list, because the lists are bad. A lot of our voters are renters. They move around. They're not on the list. So how do you get to them? You get to them through knocking on doors and going, in neighborhoods and connections, the same way you're connected to your friends. The voters who are not voting, have friends and people who can get them to vote, right? So, they did all that, and Senator now Maggie Hassan won her election by 1,027 votes. So these unknown heroes in New Hampshire did this, and then so that was the vote that allowed us to save healthcare. People give John McCain credit because he flipped Trump off, but without these unknown local heroes in New Hampshire electing Maggie Hassan by 1,027 votes, they would have gotten rid of Obamacare. So, and then we see this happen over and over again. Every single election, there are close races like that we invested in. So, the biggest election, of course, we're proud of is 2020, when it was decided by 43,000 votes between Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia, and we moved millions and millions of dollars collectively, all of us, to organizations that talk to tens of millions of voters and were the margin of victory and got us to be in the world that we're in instead of the nightmarish world if Trump had been elected. Fast forward to this recent election. So I think, I know I'm going on long, but, well, I'm trying to decide if I should bring in Corina and Javier now, or if I should give a quick and dirty about the next 10 years. I'm going to give a quick and dirty about the next 10 years and then bring you guys in. So anyway.
Billy, one second. First of all, I want to encourage you. You're going to need more passion and enthusiasm about what you do. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, it is a beautiful thing. And you have just given us a tutorial on how to make a difference in elections and how you do. What I'd like to do is save the piece about going forward and invite Javier and Corina. Just briefly, tell us 3 or 4 things you're really proud of that you did in the last election that made a difference.
And actually, so Corina, why don't you go first? And I think if you could just give a little backstory, because I want people to understand what it looks like to transform a state.
Terrific.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you all. And you might hear some Coco Melon, which is a kid songs in the background. My son is here this morning. I'm also a mom. So juggling many hats this morning. Thank you all for having us on. It's really amazing to be in community with folks that really care about issues that are so important to continue to not only save our democracy, but expand it, right? And make sure that every single American is given the voice that they deserve and that is their right. So a little backstory, you all heard about how I got involved in organizing, and to this day, I still consider myself an organizer. I think even though I am in philanthropy, I am still an organizer of money at this point, which is just as important for us to be able to win these elections in these critical states, because our partners need them. And we refer to the groups that we work with, our grantees, the people doing the work on the ground, as our partners. So you'll hear me say that word. We have about 26 partners in the state of Arizona. These are groups of all ranges, of all sizes, primarily led by young people, by women, by people of color in the state that do this work because they're very closely connected to issues that are impacting our society, including climate justice, criminal justice, reproductive rights, immigration, education. So people fighting on the front lines. And if you're familiar with the infrastructure, the organizing infrastructure in Arizona now, you would know that it wasn't the same 12 years ago. Our current organizing infrastructure really grew out of a moment where Arizonans in the most marginalized of communities were facing bigotry, were facing hate, were facing oppression at the likes of men like Russell Pierce, the author of SB 1070, the Show Me Your Papers law. If you all are not familiar with it, we can link it in the chat, but it's basically giving the police in the state the ability to be immigration officers and pull anyone who looked like they could be quote unquote undocumented over and ask them for their documents and then put them into deportation proceedings, right? So SB 1070, who was written, co-authored by Russell Pierce, signed into law by Governor Brewer right after she was appointed into office when Janet Napolitano left, really sparked this massive galvanization of organizing in the state. There was a mass exodus looming in the state. Folks, many Latinos, many folks who feared the racial profiling that this policy would have started to leave the state. And, people started to really boycott the state. There was a national outcry and hundreds of thousands of people came to Arizona, which led to like 120-day vigil outside of our state capital. But, eventually all of these national organizations and people and media outlets left. And who was left behind were the people that would continue to live in Arizona and continue to face, the backlash and the effects of SB 1070 paired with the enforcement and fascist policies of Joe Arpaio, the infamous sheriff with Tent City. And so those people had a choice to make. I was one of those people. We had a choice to make, and we chose to continue to fight. And, this beautiful movement was born out of it. And we knew that it was about coming together and fighting and building something that would be the foundation for change that would last for years. And we started flexing our electoral muscle. Going out, not knowing what we were doing, we went and got a bunch of voter registration forms from our county recorders and trained, our moms and our tias and our brothers and sisters to go out and talk to people who were so outraged and said, this is what you can do. We need you to register to vote, and we're going to recall Russell Pierce. And within a year and a half, the author of the bill was recalled by this grassroots effort in the state of Arizona. And that group of people essentially went on to become this organizers, the One Arizona, which is the biggest grassroots C3 civic engagement organization in the state now, with over 30 partners. So that was really a moment where we showed up, and we continue to show up over the years. So something that I am, a 12-year trajectory now. So that just gives you some context of where it all started. We didn't get to 2020, 2022 overnight. These groups have been progressively moving the needle by talking to communities of color every single cycle. And we're building a strong foundation that is going to be the foundation that saves democracy. These folks are not coming in coming in for the election and then ballooning out. No, they're here, and they're going to continue to stay here because they understand that it's more than just about elections. It's about power building and long-term power building in this state, so that our democracy continues to expand and also be representative of the people that live in that particular state. So I'm really proud of the Movement Voter Project for believing in these small groups, right? And believing in the sheer hustle and vision that these groups have. Those are the change makers. Those are the people that have gotten us to where we're at. We've been able to seed fund, we called seed funding, giving the first grants to some of the smaller organizations that have made a difference in the last 2 cycles. We've seed funded organizations in rural counties like Pinal County in Arizona. We know that in order for us to continue to win in the state, we have to expand our strategy. We've seed funded the first API-led organization in the state to be at the table. We've seed funded the first C4 political native organization in the state. And we've done so much to invest in races that are not at the national scope, that people maybe not care about as much, but have such an impact on local communities, like the county attorney's race in the state. We worked with abolitionist organizations that are working to figure out and reimagine how we work through the criminal justice injustices in our state. So I'm extremely proud that MVP has given me the autonomy and the decision-making power to trust these groups and to invest in their really important work. And it's something that not all funders do in philanthropy, lead from a place of trust. So I'm extremely proud of that work. And Sherry, I want to take a moment to honor your comment to say that Arizona is not completely transformed, because it is true. While we have made many strides in the state electorally, and it has helped people feel safer and more empowered, we want to take a moment to own those victories, but also to know and to say that we're in a very fragile state now more than ever. We have to continue to expand and safeguard democracy and the wins that we've made, so that we can win next cycle and the cycle after that. So that's why I keep talking about this foundation. This foundation needs to be rock solid. We can't afford for it to be fragile, and investing in the partners that MVP works with every single day is the way that we get to do that, because they have access to limited resources and are doing outreach to a part of the population that traditional party infrastructure and campaigns do not reach out to. So we are their lifeline. And so I have always said that in the trajectory of my career, I have felt that I have been at the right place at the right time. And I feel that more than ever. I've learned so much, and I have seen the tremendous need for capacity resources and for monetary resources and thought partnership to these groups over the last 10 years. And I am exactly where I need to be, and so excited and proud of the work that we're doing and of the support that people like you have given us. So I'll stop at that and let you move on to Javier.
Before we do Javier, Karina, first of all, thank you. I've got two quick questions. One is there any particular project in Arizona right now for which you're looking for funding?
Yes. So this year, we have two really amazing programs. We have one program that is supporting all of the women of color executive directors in the state. Arizona is very unique in that our progressive infrastructure is led primarily by women of color. And so we have a big cohort that we see this not as an off year, but as a power building year, getting us ready for 2024. And we need to make sure that just like we support candidates, we support the internal infrastructure of the leaders that are doing the very important work day to day. So that's a program we're actively fundraising for. And our voter registration program, led by the One Arizona, which targets communities of color, the new American majority. We have registered over 1 million new voters in the last 12 years. So we're excited to continue that work. And the last program that we're really excited about this year is a candidate pipeline on the grassroots side. So we are looking at really being very intentional, like Carrie mentioned, or Sherry mentioned earlier. We have seen wins at the top of the ticket, but unfortunately that hasn't trickled all the way down. We have our first Democratic governor in 16 years since Janet left, which you see the connection. Janet left, Brewer came in, signed SB 1070, right? So we see the direct correlations between politicians that do not stand with community to those who do, though the system is not perfect, right? But looking at that trickle down, so the legislature, I think we're at a place where our voters and our donors understand we have a Democratic governor who can veto, but cannot proactively try to pass bills to move the state forward. So we are in the midst of creating a very comprehensive program across our state that will be run by multiple partners in their expertise areas to intentionally recruit, train, and build out co-governance models with candidates who we hope will win in the 2024 cycle and get us to a majority in the legislature. So we are actively fundraising for those 3 programs.
Very well said. And if you want to put those 3 programs in chat and then maybe list them a little bit later in the show for people who aren't going to do chat, let's make sure we do that. Great.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Javier, over to you, sir.
So great to be with you all, and I thank you for this great conversation. So in terms of the work that I do, so my title at MVP is I'm Senior State Strategy Director. I had the joy of working with our state advisors, people like Corina, on what is, I think, the magic sauce of the work that MVP does, which is to be deeply embedded in grassroots work, to be able to then encourage donors to resource that really great work. So as you heard earlier in my bio, I'm the former president of a labor union here in Minnesota, SEIU 26. We're a union of janitors, security officers, and other service workers. In the time I was president, we doubled our membership from 4,000 to 8,000. And I'll say to preface kind of my remarks here, right, that in my time as a labor leader, I especially in the early years, I would listen to labor leaders give speeches, and I think there's something something that labor folks tend to be very articulate about all the negative things that have happened to us, and there are many. But I would hear labor leaders speak about all of, how the right has changed the laws to hurt unions, et cetera, and it was always these speeches that sounded really depressing, and I would listen to them and think, well, who wants to join your movement? Like, you sound like you're losing. So I as we think about big issues like the threats to our democracy, which we, if you're anything like me, probably spend a lot of time thinking, a lot of time really sad or angry or fearful about. So I'd like to talk a little bit about hope, and the hope that I draw in terms of this work is precisely the fact that we are focused in building power within states. We are living right now in a moment where traveling across the United States, like getting on a plane or in a car, means that as one crosses state lines, you gain or lose rights. And the prospect of what that can mean in the future, if Clarence Thomas gets his way in the future, my husband and I, as we travel, will have to plot out what states we will be able to go to and be able to, as we age together, ensure that if something happens to one of us, we can visit each other in the hospital. And so it is as important as it ever has been to build power within states. Right now in Minnesota, for example, women from the Dakotas, the lieutenant governor of the state of Minnesota is a good friend of mine, and she's an Ojibwe woman, and she was telling me about stories that we know right now of Native women selling their wares, their goods, so that they can come to Minnesota to receive reproductive health care that is denied to them in their states. We are an oasis in the state right now in the Midwest. But the work that we do at MVP, in both Minnesota and places like Wisconsin, where we're focused on a Supreme Court race in the coming weeks, that race in Wisconsin could mean the difference between like Midwest having another state where reproductive rights are protected. So I come to this work having worked within labor to develop a model in Minnesota for community labor partnership that has really won big things for the people of our state. And I think we sometimes when we think about like folks like when Scott Walker was elected in Wisconsin, we forget, right, that was actually he had a narrow victory at the time, but he didn't govern as if he had a narrow victory. He actually really transformed that state, and our partner groups in Wisconsin have been clawing their way back ever since, and to bring that state back. But in Minnesota in 2012, Democrats won a trifecta, meaning that they controlled both houses of the legislature and the governorship. But they were so concerned that with keeping that power that they were timid in the kind of proposals, the kind of things that they did. And so we had an opportunity then to pass 100% renewable energy, and we passed on that. We had an opportunity then to restore felon voting rights. We passed on that. We had an opportunity then to pass driver's licenses for all, so that our immigrant communities, who are the backbone of our agricultural industry in Minnesota, so folks can get to work. We passed on that. We did pass a minimum wage, but it was after a big battle, only went to $10, and we had to really seriously publicly campaign against the Democratic Senate majority leader at that time, so to ensure that minimum wage was indexed to inflation. Fast forward to this last election, where Democrats, because they were so worried about keeping power in 2012, they lost it 2 years later. And I think we all collectively learned a big lesson here. And so this past election, when Democrats once again won a trifecta, right now, Minnesota passed. And the last few weeks, the governor has signed the Minnesota PRO Act, which enshrines reproductive rights into law in Minnesota, really fortifies the rights that women and all have in our state. We passed a 100% renewable energy bill. Was just signed this week. That is it is the best legislation now in the country for getting to 100% renewable energy by 2040 with markers in on the way there. The felon voter restoration has passed the Minnesota House, as have driver's licenses. We are making progress in all these areas. And that comes out of years of investments in not just large groups and not just labor unions doing the work, but in smaller organizations and really helping to build what we call the rising American electorate, which is people who from communities of color, disenfranchised communities who vote at much lower rates. To me, I think it's incredibly important that we focus on this kind of power building in states, because we can make critical change, and because the critical change that we make in our states today impact not just that state, but surrounding states. And I think in a moment in history right now where we really see our democracy under threat, when we see the rise of political violence, and just I am frankly, spend a lot of time terrified about what may be coming down the line there. I think our best defense is going to be having activated citizenries wherever we can mobilize folks, but in particular in places where we can put forth a bold and positive agenda to make sure we do that boldly and govern when we have a chance to govern, not with an eye toward keeping power, but actually with an eye toward improving people's lives. And I just think that that is critical, and that is the work that Movement Voter Project does in Minnesota and across the Midwest and across the country and states we work in. And that's by working directly with the folks on the ground from impacted communities who are doing the hard work, the day-to-day, hand-to-hand combat of saving our democracy.
Javier, Karina, Billy, each of you have not only given us tutorials on the inner mechanism of making a difference, but in sharing your individual perspectives and your stories about how you are impacted personally and why this work is so important. I hope it inspires and informs and encourages people across the country to recognize that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's what you guys do every day that makes a significant difference. And if each of us would tap into that inner passion that we have to fix, adjust, contribute to the things that matter to us most, then citizens all across the country can take part. Javier, you've just said a lot about what can be done going forward, and Karina, you as well. Billy, will you come back in and give us an overview of other things we can do going ahead to ensure a better outcome in 2024?
And Billy, before you do that, because I know this is on your agenda, and Javier, you mentioned it, let's definitely talk about the most important election of this year, which is neighboring to our friend in Minnesota, that as part of how you're going forward. You're muted, Billy.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, so I'll give a quick overview. We've been thinking about the next 20 months and the next 10 years and the kind of the roadmap there. And then I want to ask you, Karina and Javier, to talk about how you're seeing the next period and, you know, what the folks you're working with are doing and what people can do. First, I just want to say, I feel so lucky to get to work with this team. Like the most brilliant, committed, caring, like you couldn't ask for a better group of people to work with. So I just like the MVP team is like phenomenal. And yeah, I wish you could meet all of our state advisors and team members. So and just to back up and like double click on a couple things, the way that Minnesota was able to pass all these like 100% renewable, like one of the strongest 100% renewable standards in the country, you know, driver's licenses, you know, they restored the voting rights of, or they're about to restore the voting rights of 70,000 people on probation, you know, all of that came down to one seat in the state Senate, which was decided by 321 votes. So this is, I'm really passionate about telling these stories about super close elections because it's very empowering for us. It's not like, oh, politics are these big things up there that we can't do anything about. No, they come down to margins like that. And if you look on the website on our report, there's 25 of these close elections, including, you know, in Arizona, they just won the attorney general race, really hugely important race by like 260 votes, you know? So like, these are not anomalies, like every election, and there's 25 of them just in the 2020 election that were incredibly close, that our partners actually made a huge difference in. So, so I just want to lift that up. So, so where are we now? Where are we going from here? I mean, first of all, we're actually only just 20 months out from the 2024 election. Like early voting is starting in September now, in 2024. So it's coming right up. And, you know, I think a lot of people are kind of in a mindset of like, oh, Trump, you know, lots of talk about Trump. To me, the real threat is DeSantis. And I want us to be really clear about that. Sure, I could be wrong. Sure, there could go lots of different ways. But the real threat right now is DeSantis. And if you look at voting patterns, you know, the way that he would be likely to peel off suburban swing voters in the suburbs of Atlanta, Phoenix, you know, Milwaukee, is very concerning. And so we have to prepare for the most likely scenario is also the most concerning scenario in the next 20 months. And people who are not like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, we'll wait and see how it all plays out. We cannot afford to wait, y'all. Like we have to, like Corina was saying, we have to invest in 2023 to help, you know, we're going to be dragging Biden across this finish line. Okay. Who's going to be dragging them? The young people in Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin, you know, and all these other states. We have to give them unprecedented support to do that because they have incredible heavy lifting to do. The work they do is way bigger than the Democratic Party, way bigger than the candidate campaigns. And it's hard to point to because it's like, you know, 40 groups that you've never heard of, but together they are talking to tens of millions of voters. Okay, so just want to like really lift that up. In terms of, so if DeSantis wins, I'm going to tell you the bad stuff and then I'll tell you the good stuff. If DeSantis wins, they almost certainly, or whoever Republican candidate, they almost certainly also get a trifecta at the federal level. If you look at the House, the dynamics of the House, the dynamics of the Senate, it is almost certain that if they win the presidency, they also have the Senate, the House, and the Supreme Court. And if you look at what DeSantis is doing in Florida, he is running it like an autocracy. And I won't go into all the details. Hopefully you all are paying attention to this. It is really scary. Like a DeSantis presidency and trifecta in my opinion, would be so much worse than Trump. Not just worse, so much worse than Trump. So like if people were like scared of Trump, we need to be like really, really concerned about this DeSantis scenario. And when you look at the next 10 years, like we talk about wanting to build a progressive decade, like a sustainable progressive, like what they, have just barely gotten to in Minnesota. Hopefully Minnesota's on the trajectory to a progressive decade. That's what we want to build for the whole country, because that's what we need for our climate, for our people, for everything. There's a pathway to a progressive decade. It is a very narrow path. And if we don't get this right in the next 20 months, which means in 2023, when we have to do the important investments, all bets are off starting in 2025. Like there is no path to anything good anytime soon. And if you look at the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, oldest Supreme Court justice, 74 years old. If we can hold the presidency and the Senate until he's ready to retire, we can replace him. Alito, 72. Eventually, we can replace Alito. If we can hold the presidency and the Senate until that happens, if we lose the presidency, Thomas can retire and be replaced by a 45-year-old. Then we're not talking about a decade-long trajectory. We're talking about 3 decades before we can have a reasonable Supreme Court. Okay, so this is not your grandfather's Senate, folks. This is like the Senate map is terrifying right now. Like in 2008, there were 16 Democrats in red states in the Senate. We had both senators in Arkansas. We had all 4 senators in the Dakotas, right? We had senators in Indiana. That world is gone, right? Right now, there are only 3 Democrats left in red states in Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. They're all up in 2024. Plus, we have, plus there's Arizona, which the whole cinema wild card is, we're going to have to like do everything we can to support Arizona to keep that Senate race. And then there are 4 more that are swing Senate states, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. So we have to defend 8 seats. And luckily, we're going to be able to pick up some Republicans in blue states. Oh, wait, no, we're not. There are no Republicans in blue states. There are no Republicans that we can pick up seats from in blue states. Well, luckily, in 2026 or 2028, there will be. No, there are no Republicans in 2026 or 2028 or 2030 in blue states that we're going to pick up. In fact, there are only 4 Republicans that are even in purple states where we even have a like halfway decent shot to pick up between now and 2030. So like 2026, we have Susan Collins is up in Maine. 2028, Ron Johnson is up again in Wisconsin, the one we just lost. Those are not going to be easy. And then North Carolina has one in 26 and 28. That's it. Those are our only chance. Anyway, if we don't win the presidency and the Senate in 2024, in 20 months from now, everything is really, really bleak after that, like bleaker than it's ever been in our lifetimes. And you thought Trump was bad. This would be much, much worse. And it wouldn't get better anytime soon. Okay. That's a bad scenario. Good scenario is if we can make it over this mountain, right? Over the 2024 mountain, if we can hold that, if we can hold the presidency and the Senate, things should get a little bit easier every election after that, right? Because the rising electorate, as Javier talked about, there's 7 million new voters coming into the electorate every cycle, 18 and 19-year-olds. Those voters have been voting consistently 60-40 for Democrats for the last 9 election cycles. So if we keep investing in them, if we keep investing in communities of color, in this rising electorate of young people, that's 1.4 million net Democratic votes in the electorate. That means 50,000 net Democratic new voters in North Carolina, in Georgia, right? In a state that size, 50,000 new voters every 2 years. So, 4 years later, the Republicans' job is much harder in a Georgia, right? And it's, in a North Carolina, because there's 100,000 new net Democratic voters in that state if we can invest in them. So if we get through this, our job should get a little easier every 2 years, right? And then here's the like pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. 2030, redistricting happens. We should be in range to redistrict in a better, or to win the governorship of states like Texas and Georgia, in the 2030 election. And that means that we can have a hand in redistricting. The redistricting won't be as terrible in states like Georgia and Texas and others, which means that in the next election in 2032, we'll have new maps, we'll have like a more favorable situation. And then in the 2033 legislative cycle in those states and nationally, we should, if we play our cards right, be able to have a truly democratic governing majority in trifecta. Hopefully we'll get the Supreme Court by then too. So that is the very narrow good road that we have to put all of our focus on keeping our country on that road. And it's literally a 10-year plan from 2023 to 2033. We have a contested decade. And if we win that contest, then we get a progressive decade after that. So that is all of our legacies on this planet who care about the next generations and the, democracy. All the cards are on the table. And there's a 10-year trajectory. I hope I painted a helpful picture, and want to pass it to Corina and Javier to say how you're thinking about the short term and longer term future. Corina?
Yeah, that was a lot. Like I literally had like a lot for a Tuesday morning. Wednesday, I don't even know anymore. But thank you for giving us that breakdown, Billy. I think it's really important that we are grounded in the reality of what we're up against. I will preface my piece by saying that I would not be doing this work if I didn't have hope and I didn't have faith that as Americans, as people, we can do better and we can choose to do better. And we've proven that we can do that, right? We have been faced with some tough challenges that have really called us to unite and have called us to make the right choices, to choose each other instead of choosing to listen to and follow this divisive rhetoric and hateful rhetoric that that would lead to mass incarceration and death, and the death of our planet and stripping of reproductive rights and all of these things, right? We have chosen each other, and we have chosen to represent each other at the ballot box. So we saw that in this very critical midterm election. We saw it in Arizona. I think that our organizing, our groups, were really confident that we would win at the top of the ticket, at least like we did. And we kept hearing contradicting messaging from, national political pundits and just people that were not connected to the ground, and saying that you cannot win, you cannot defy the odds in a midterm. Folks are going to overwhelmingly be voting for the opposite party. And we didn't just show up in Arizona, we showed up across the country. But that would have not been the case had it not been for the amazing work and of our partners, the relentless work of our partners. That is so different because we are not just knocking doors and talking to people about the elections. We're talking to them about what's at stake in these elections. And we're doing it from a relationship based in trust with these folks. These are organizations that have been around in the community for years and identify with the people that they're talking to. So they're trusted messengers. They're the only ones who can move this demographic to come out and vote. So what I would say for the future is that we need to continue our relationship and our investment in these groups with these partners. In Arizona, I like to say we have something called contagious chaos. And what happens and starts here tends to, set the tone for different very negative, radical things across the country, like insurrectionists, right, who post their tweets about being at the Capitol on January 6th and then decide to run for one of the highest offices, election offices in the state. Fortunately, again, we were able to defeat that person. So 2024, right? 2024, we will have our Senate race that will be happening. I hope we are all aware of what's been going on with Senator Sinema. She's now chosen to peel herself off and be an independent. We have a champion on the Democratic side who has decided to run, and we hope that we are able to put that person in office. It's going to be a really tight race, and then that we're able to protect the gains that we've made at the state legislature, and to pick up the state legislature. So we're talking about that program that I talked about earlier that I think is going to be all hands on deck work from our partners to really pull together an in-depth analysis and think about the work that it's going to take and put together the curriculum and plan and the right candidates to get us governing power. That's the ultimate goal, is to be at a place of governance, but at a place of real governance where we are not faced with obstructionists, right? That can happen very easily at the legislative level too. And that's why our work is supplementative of the party. As you know, the party doesn't run primaries or doesn't endorse and support primaries. We have that same scenario that has played out at the Senate level, national level, can play out at the legislative level in Arizona. So we could end up with a slim majority in the state legislature and have obstructionists on the Democratic side. So we need to be very intentional and deliberate about who we run and who, and the majority, what the majority looks like. The devil will be in the details. So for us, we've had our progressive, well, I don't know if we call it our progressive decade, but it's been the decade that has gotten us to where we're at. And the next decade will be about protecting our wins and getting to a place of governance. And that will only be done by continuing to invest in every possible way in these groups. So I will leave it at that.
Yeah, and Corina, how close are you in the state legislature to having a Minnesota-like situation? You're only a couple seats away,
Two
right?
seats. Yeah, 2 seats. If we were able to pick up one of the chambers, we would have we could stopgap bad legislation, right? And keep it from moving forward. Thankfully, now we have the veto power. So the ultimate, dream scenario would be for us to pick up both chambers so that we could actually proactively move legislation and have that Democratic trifecta, and be able to pass really progressive policies, which we haven't been able to do in the state. One thing I'll note before I hand it over to Javier is that our partners haven't just been playing offense, they've been playing a lot of defense. They are the same folks that have been going out at the front lines and defeating bad bills, right? That looks like visits to the legislature every day during legislative session. It looks like reaching out to constituency bases to inform them about the bad bills that have been slowly chipping away at democracy, which is something we haven't even talked about, right? It's like trying to get rid of the early voting ballot here in the state of Arizona, which is something that Democrats actually, or Republicans actually introduced, and now in the last 2 sessions have been adamantly trying to get rid of because they've seen the gains, right, that our partners have been able to make. And so we've had to be at the legislature. Our partners don't do just election work, they do accountability work. So they make sure that when somebody is elected, that they're being held up to a standard on which they ran. So continuing to have that holistic approach to democracy is important. It's not just about winning elections. It's about making sure we have the right people in those seats and that we're holding them accountable to what they were elected to do.
Karina, thank you. And Javier, we want to hear from you. This has been a very important conversation, and we're getting to the end of our program. So if you could be a little tailored in your response, and then we can wrap up. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would just say, Karina hinted to something there, that there was a point in the last election cycle when she and the folks on the ground in Arizona were told, your races are not winnable. And there was a lot of punditry around that, and you all, can remember that the pundits were in agreement that it was going to be a Republican wave year in November, and in Wisconsin, I saw someone talking about this in the chat. Mandela Barnes was under enormous attack by right-wing organizations, painting him as an extremist, as anti-police, etc. And a lot of Democrats and Democratic pundits and consultants bought that hype. And it was folks on the ground in Arizona and in Minnesota and Wisconsin. In Minnesota, Keith Ellison, there was the morning of the election, a political pundit here published anonymous pundits and their predictions for the election. And every single one of them, including the Democrats, predicted that Keith Ellison would lose and lose big. The people who did not lose faith in those races were the most impacted communities, and the organizations that Movement Voter Project supports. And we won Keith Ellison narrowly. And Mandela Barnes, if you look at the investments that national groups and like the Senate Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, in the final weeks, they spent a lot more money in races that they ended up losing, and essentially pulled out of Wisconsin. So I think one of the lessons here is listen to folks on the ground, not to pundits. The folks on the ground know what's going on. The folks on the ground in Arizona literally brought in people, say, you come out in the doors with us, listen to what we're hearing. And so, and that's how they changed people's minds, and they started getting the investment they needed to pull off the amazing victories that they did. So we have to operate from a place of hope, grounded in organizing and the people who know that organizing on the ground in our states.
So first of all, I want to thank you on behalf of our audience for a variety of things: the emotion, the passion, the content, the specificity, the caring. I also want to say that you're not through with us. We'll have you back because the story you tell is really critical. Billy, there are very few people that I talk to that have the grasp on the flow over decades or more and the true consequence of what this election is like, or who articulate it as clearly as you do. What most people don't know is the reason we're in such deep whatever that we're in is that Lewis Powell in 1972 set out a clear blueprint that the Republicans have followed to gain minority control over the majority. And we need to take that back and not ever lose it again. So I want to thank you. I want to find a way to have as many people see this program as possible. So those of you who are out there, please recommend this program to people that you know so that they can hear the inside truth and the path that it will be required to take to get there. So I also want to leave you with a quote, and then John and Jim can take us out. And that is David Lloyd George, former prime minister in England during the First World War, had a statement he used often, and that is, don't be afraid to take a big leap, because 2 small steps will never cross a chasm. And that's what we do. We have to take big leaps, and this is the time to do it. John? Jim?
George, I'll echo what you said about the program, and Billy and Karina and Javier, thank you for making your lives about big leaps. Thank you. Great to be with you all, and more to come. And as George said, absolutely more to make use of what you all have offered us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, George, Billy, Karina, and Javier. Thank you so much. This has been an inspiring session, and I wish we had more time. In part, Billy, because I think what you laid out in your second statement was the first time, at least I've heard, of an analysis strategically that intuitively to me makes sense. And I think the takeaway for me on that is that, the 2020 election, 2022 were just chapters in a much longer story, and a scenario that the progressive movement could easily lose if, in fact, in 2024, the Republicans pull off what we know they're going after, and that is the trifecta, as you call it, of dominance in the House, in the Senate, and in the presidency. And if that happens, then the damage could easily be irredeemable, at least in our lifetime over the next couple of decades. And that thin road that you were talking about for the Democrats, I just hope we can get that out there so that the progressive forces are organizing all on the same page. I mean, if we could get everybody on the same page, that would do wonders. And I think you laid it out in a powerful way. And I just want to acknowledge that. And then also, Karina, if we had more time, I would love to hear more stories about how Arizona Republicans went down that rabbit hole and seem to be perfectly comfortable there and are deepening the hole. It's quite a remarkable political story of Arizona. George, let's get Karina back just to talk about Arizona. I think that would be a really both entertaining, but also sobering and inspiring at the same time. And in that spirit, Javier, I just love your insatiable optimism and your hopefulness, because I think that in the end is the ingredient internally that we all need to embody just to keep going. And so the combination of the three of you, I think, has been exceptionally potent today. And I just want to acknowledge that and bless you all for it. As I said in my opening, this is a time where only heroism is going to save the day in America. And the three of you have been exemplifying it in very, very powerful ways in our session today. So I want to thank you all. So that'll bring us to a close, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat box. But before we leave, George, why don't you just tee up tomorrow?
Tomorrow is another really spectacular day. It's about progressives on the ground and what they're doing and how they're contributing. all part of this puzzle that we have to keep focusing on. And thanks to the work that John and Margo do and their engagement and support with all of these organizations, we're able to bring these voices to you. So come back tomorrow, come back Friday, come back to the other conversations we're going to have. But above all, roll your sleeves out and up and get the hell out into the world and do what you have to do. Will you?
Thank you, George. Thank you, John. Thank you, Margo. Thank you all. That's it for today. See you tomorrow. Bye.